5.5 hour flight away. I do come visit a lot, not this year, evidently. So I'm really happy to be here with the community. So can you see my screen? Elena, is that okay?
Yes.
All right, good. So we would have started with a breakout room where you would be discussing the following question with a couple of people. It's partly introduction, it's partly a way to just think through the question. So instead, what we're going to do is anybody who wants to answer this, let's say up to 3 answers, just unmute yourself and tell us what you think. If your team collaborated more than they already do, maybe what they already do is nothing, maybe it's a lot. What would that accomplish? What pains would that alleviate? What gains would that bring for the team, for your customers, for the organization? So who wants to go? Hey, Andrew, good to see you again.
Hey, how you doing? I'm very clear that a greater level of collaboration increases the chances of greater cognitive diversity, more brains applying to the same context and problems. So there's much more likely to be a greater range of original ideas being produced.
Beautiful. So you expand the problem space, you expand the solution space, everybody wins. Okay, awesome. Someone else?
I'll go.
All right, Todd.
Pretty sure that my people would develop faster.
Okay.
They would take on tasks that maybe they weren't typecast to do, or kind of grab challenges and chew on them in a different way.
Okay. And what would that accomplish?
Well, that would propel them in their careers more quickly, and maybe more learning and just faster skill development, which ultimately makes us better.
Right. So it's good all around, right?
Absolutely.
Your first benefit is the people themselves. And ultimately, it's also, of course, for the business customers and so on. Does anybody have a third answer?
Yeah, I'll go.
Hey, Karan.
So I'm going to go for both safety and ownership. So the more collaboration, the more everyone owns the project, the product, the work, the collaboration, the joy, all of it.
All right, greater ownership, that is terrific, and safety, of course, that kind of goes together. Okay, good. So why this particular session? There does seem to be general consensus that, collaboration is a good thing, right? I suppose everybody here would agree with this, otherwise you probably would not be attending this talk. However, I think, based on my observations, talking to people, having been in Agile 20 years and, everybody I talk to, it seems that very few teams actually enjoy real collaboration. And what's particularly painful is that they rarely know why that is. So we want to change that, right? And that's what we're here for today. So like I mentioned, 20 years in Agile, and Agile is big on collaboration. I have, as coach, trainer, facilitator, general troublemaker, I must have crossed paths with more than 10,000 people. But the topic of today is not something I have been seeing only in Agile. I would say it goes back in my personal history. I think, ever since I was even in high school, I've been paying attention to how or if or when people work with others. So not only in software. So even though this talk is very relevant for Agile work, it actually carries over to other areas. And you will also see this in the examples that I will give you. So what you can expect today is this. We're going to start by basically distinguishing collaboration and cooperation. We're going to proceed with the 9 prerequisites or conditions, really necessary conditions, before any 2 people will collaborate. Then we're going to go to deterrence. Okay, so even once the prerequisites are met, there will be things, cues and pressures in the environment that discourage people from collaborating. And then I will tie this all together for you in a process. Now, I will not be sharing the slides, but there is the handout, right? So if you didn't get it before, I would ask that you get it now. So Elena, if you would paste this thing again in the chat for people. And again, like I said, if you also decide to, get my articles and such, then I will raffle one of my books between you at the end of the talk. So let's get started. Collaboration. When I ask people to define it, the answer I get is usually the first line of the two that you see on the slide. People working together, shared objective. But to me, collaboration is actually a higher standard, and we actually heard it in Ron's answer, right? So the third answer we heard for, like, why really collaborate? And it's really the element of joint ownership, right? So I would say that 2 or more people are collaborating if they all see themselves as co-owners. So here are some examples. The top right, that should be a familiar scene to all of you, except the sword. That's a stand-up. A stand-up is supposed to be collaborative team micro-planning, right, for the next 24 hours. The picture on the top left, that is pair programming. Pair programming isn't 2 people on a computer. Pair programming is collaboration. It is shared ownership, right? What you see at the bottom left is the same thing on steroids. So that's mobbing. Now, a lot of you would know mobbing from mob programming, when we have an entire team carry out a task at the same time, like basically one computer, one screen, because we want them not to split up and to think together. What you're actually seeing in that picture is from a client I had in Edmonton a few years ago. And these 5 people are actually BAs. So this is mob analysis, I suppose. And they had been used to basically doing data modeling, and it's in financial firm, and like Excels all the time. And, one day they decided, let's just do the next task together. So they got a meeting room and just started working on it together. And it was exactly mobbing. The example you see at the bottom right is something that I will come back to a couple of times in this talk. This is a set of volunteers. And so, I'm here talking to you about Agile, but which clearly is a big passion for me. But another thing I'm kind of weird about or crazy for is adventure racing. So if anybody ever watches The Amazing Race on TV, that's my thing. I don't go on TV, but I do participate in their race, which is weekend long here in Ontario. And it's just like the TV race without the flying and, sleeping on sidewalks. So what you're seeing here are 10, 12, I don't know, a bunch of people who share ownership over putting the race together. They specialize. One person is all about volunteer coordination. There's 100 of those volunteers. Another one is racer coordination. Another one is puzzle design and challenge design and locations and whatever, but they always help each other. They think together, they backfill for each other. You can always count on one person to do something, but to have backup, and the backup will spring into action. So that to me is collaboration. Cooperation is a different beast. In cooperation, every participant focuses on completing their own part. So the example on the right would probably be painfully familiar to many of you. It's when, one person does the deving and one person does the testing, and they pass stuff off to each other. And the big idea there is that, one person does their part correctly, the other person does their part correctly. Everything should work out, right? Sort of the logic behind waterfall. What you see on the left is a relay race. It actually works the exact same way, right? So you need 4 really awesome runners, and they need to pass the baton properly and to take it properly and all of that. But once one runner finishes running, that's it. They cannot help each other or, make anything different. Their part is done. So even though they do have a shared objective, and all of our teams have shared objectives, it's a matter of how much each person can contribute to others and kind of lift them up. Okay, so why collaborate? Again, when I ask people, I get the obvious answers. Usually the answers are framed positively, right? We have more minds, we have better ideas, better quality. This is correct, and it's awesome, and we want it. But think about the flip side too. What if we didn't? What if we didn't? What if we had people generally working on their own? And I would contend that that's risky business, especially when we're doing knowledge work, which is really, everybody here. I mean, look at all the stuff that could go wrong when people work on their own, I mean, I can speak from my own my own personal experience, and not just in the last 6 weird months. If you have me do some, heavy cognitive lifting after lunch, I'm likely to, kind of get a little tired and, kind of lose focus and, read the news more than I should and whatever. And it's the same with other people. Other times that they they forget, they don't tell, they focus on their own thing and so on. So if you have people collaborate, more than one person, taking ownership for the result, you do not eliminate these, but you definitely mitigate them a fair bit. And so collaboration is a huge principle in Agile because pretty much the fundamental assumption there is that it's worth it. Even though there are costs associated and trade-offs and whatever, it is worth it because it reduces the risks of employing human beings, not just giving us the positives of, more ideas and more quality. Nevertheless, I don't think that you need to collaborate 100% of the time. I think what you really need in a team is you need balance, and it's a balance between collaboration, obviously, some form of cooperation, and some form of solo ownership. I don't think it's wrong. I think it needs to be situationally determined based on the job at hand, the nature of the work, the personalities, what you need further. So like we heard before, it helps to spread skills and people grow and they can chew on more things that bite into more things than they can right now. So it's also good for the future. But of course, there's also this element of, we're all human, we're not resources, right? I'm sure you've heard that before. So we want to feel pride, we want to feel accomplishment, we want to be recognized. So you also want to account for that. I've worked with many teams where there was collaboration and people did feel pride and accomplishment for their team's work. It's beautiful, but it's not obvious, right? So you have to work with what you have and hopefully build up to something better. So if there is a gap between your current state and the ideal balance, it's probably a matter of not enough collaboration, right? There's probably more of the solo and the handoff and the cooperation. So we're going to see how to increase this, but I want us to make this concrete for you. So please take a moment. We're not going to be sharing right now, okay? But I do want to give you like half a minute to think of a specific situation as an example that you will be applying what I share with you to, okay? So this is really active learning, okay? So let's take 30 seconds to think about this, and then we'll continue. Now, if you're struggling to find a current example, it's okay if it's a recent one, okay? But really the point is to have something because otherwise we're going to be talking about a lot of abstractions, even though I'll give you lots of examples. Okay, so as we go through those prerequisites and deterrents, do reflect on how they apply to your specific example. And at the end, we will tie all of this together in a general process. So if you got the handout, you would see all of this stuff. And now I'll be expanding on, the whole story here. Now, about these prerequisites, I want to say a few things before we get to the first one. First off, you may already have a pretty good team, right? If you're familiar, let's say, with the 5 dysfunctions of a team, they're not there. So the team works. Team feels joint ownership. But what we're looking for is situations where 2 or more people collaborate on some task. What I'll show you applies to each individual there. So you might have 3 people and for them all the conditions are met, but for one of those conditions is not. That person will not participate. They'll just work on their own. Now what I'll show you are effectively mental filters. So I believe the way it works is this. People are facing a situation where, they need to think, how will we approach this? I think people run through these filters in the sequence that I will show you through their mind. And, if they pass the first one, good, they go to the second. They pass the second one, good, they go to the third. The first one that they is not satisfied, really, it's like Boolean flags. they drop off again, they go off to work on their own. And so as I go through the list of them, I will actually be asking you to share if this is actually reflective of the situation you're in. And the last thing I want to say before I get into them is that this is my work. I'm not reading out stuff from someone's book, not even my book. This is stuff that's not in the books. This stuff is not scientific. It's just based on years and years of observation and coaching. And I see the stuff play out all the time. So, take it for what it is. Okay, here's the first one. And for the first one, the first condition that needs to be satisfied in order for people to even consider collaboration is to simply have a good reason to join forces. Now, the reasons might have to do with the result at hand. So, I might collaborate with someone. I'm seeing Ainsley here on the screen. I might want to work with you on something because I'm not sure I'm specifically up to it, but maybe you are, and together we'll get it done. And there are other examples here, but the compelling reason might also have to do with beyond the result, right? We grow team muscle this way. We share knowledge. We learn how to do better next time. There's growth here. Sometimes the reason is just to have fun. And I want to give you an example of, something I do that where I meet this prerequisite. So as many of you know, I teach workshops and classes and whatnot, and they're all specialized because I don't certify people, and I teach them all on my own except one. There is a workshop that I lead once a year that is on agile transformations, like how to support them, and this one I have chosen to teach together with Johanna Rothman, which I suppose many of you already know. She teaches workshops all on her own as well. Any one of us could do this on our own, but we decided not to, because this is something where we believe that if we did together, the value to the participants would be way higher. And clearly, again, everything has trade-offs. So in this case, the trade-off is we actually need a bigger class in order for it to be financially viable, right? And things like that. It's still worth it, but it's a matter of voluntarily wanting to, saying, yes, there is a reason here. There's something compelling for joining forces. So I want to turn this to you and ask, if you're thinking of the example that I asked you to pick, is anybody here already seeing that the reason people are not collaborating is that they just don't have a good reason to? If that's your case, please go unmute and tell us.
Well, I have a couple cases, but it's more historic than anything else.
Fair enough.
In some cases, it's not that they're up to it or not up to it. It's that they generally don't talk, or they seem to be a bit shy. In one case, this person was like that until something really important came up, which completely surprised the entire team, because she was just there in the background, and suddenly she spoke up, and it was just a legitimate response, and she just generally didn't participate that way, but it was positive. The other time is, or the other times is often when you have a lead in there, or you have someone that's kind of a manager. And usually I try and pull that person back and get them to actually just guide. But that happens quite a lot. So those are my two.
Okay. All right, good. So let's move to the next one. And the next one is, we have reasons to join forces and they justify collaboration, not just cooperation or being nice to each other. Here's what you see here on the slide is what we typically do in companies, right? And people identify with the roles. And when you have this, when people have titles and when they're on a career path, and we refer to them as such as, the QA and our DBA and so on and so forth, there's sometimes the subtle implication that, they're the specialists. They just ought to do what specialists do, even though they're really all part of the shared goal. Let me give you an example of how we meet this prerequisite. And again, like I said, many of the examples I have for you are from personal life. This one is from escape rooms. So I imagine that, several of you have done escape rooms before, but several have not. So I'll generally just tell you that, it's a time-limited, sequence, sometimes parallelized puzzles that you kind of have to solve, and they're not obvious. You need observation skills and communication skills and a bunch of stuff. Great, great way to pass the time with the family. We love doing this, and we go quite a lot. And so when we go, we actually have a couple of options. We can technically split up in the room, assuming it's big enough. Usually some puzzles are parallelizable. We can split up. We can each put our best thinking caps on and really aim to ace the room. But we choose differently. Before we go into a room, usually in the 5 minutes before that, we say, okay, so how do we want to tackle that one? Do we want to work together? Or do we want to split up? And the answer is always that we want to work together, because we have learned that that is awesome for creating family memories and for just a family experience. So there's something bigger here than just, did we, escape the room on time or not? Okay, so there's a higher purpose that invites this for us. And so I would suspect that, for some of you, there's this situation at work where, people are open to joining forces, but they sometimes stop short of, joining to the extent of collaboration. Or the other one, where you are seeing collaboration, it's because people are really into it. Now, a related thing, which again, we get into trouble at work, and that is the matter of participation and is it valuable? So if I am to collaborate with someone, I need to be able to rely on them. I need to assume that they can actually, make meaningful contributions, and they will actually be there the whole time. So this example here again is from that Amazing Grace thing that I do. I'm with the same person for 50 hours. We cannot split up. The race just doesn't work this way. And I pick him, not other people, because I believe he's the best partner I could have for this. But look at what we do at work. At work, we often pigeonhole people. We often subspecialize. And what that does is people start, hesitating, could I work with that other person? Because really that they don't do what I do. I see this most often, especially in the last, I'd say 5, 8 years, with back-end developers and front-end developers, right? It used to be we had lots more full stack and that made a lot of sense, but nowadays there's more subspecialties. And, it's pretty common that, I will talk with, a back-end developer and, they will tell me, this front-end person, they don't know backend. How can they help? I personally disagree with this because I think, a good developer, that's already 80% of the collaboration. But look at what we do when we believe that. What we do is we do our task breakdown a certain way, functional usually, or technical, I should say, sorry. Very technical. People work on their own tracks, kind of in parallel. Everybody's task takes a different amount of time. So they can't even assume that others will be around to collaborate with them, okay? So this is how you end up having, situations where, the back-end people will do portions of the story and front-end people will do portions of the story, and they just kind of sit there as, they're blocked or waiting or whatever. And really all that's missing is for them to have joint ownership of those stories. I'm going to ask you if, for anybody this is ringing a bell or saying, yeah, or really demonstrating, that's why my people are not collaborating, if you would go on unmute and tell us.
Hey, Gal, I'll go. This is Gopal. I'm not sharing my idea. I had a conversation with one of the team members today. He was complaining about another team member. About how that other team member is not really adding any value and just he feels like he's being taken advantage of.
That actually speaks to one of the later prerequisites I'll show. Yeah, I think it's coming up very, very soon.
Okay.
Yeah. But here's the thing. if we took care of that one, does the person actually believe that there could be valuable contribution here? That there could be valuable collaboration with that person?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. So really, I think that this is the, the earlier filter in the sequence, right? So before I think if you're going to be fair to me, I'm going to think whether you're even an option. Okay. So that one's coming up. I think it's number 5, actually. On the way to number 5, we have number 4. Psychological safety, clearly a huge thing in Agile. I don't need to tell you about that. But think about it. I mean, when we want people to collaborate like this, they're most vulnerable, right? This is when they should feel safe to, suggest weird ideas or think out loud and potentially be wrong and all of that stuff. But there's also, again, the matter of what happens after, right? So maybe, I'm collaborating with somebody, okay, and, everything seems to go well. And then later, that other person, let's say during their one-on-one or something like that, they tell our manager, yeah, Gil, yeah, I didn't really do much. And that's not safe to me, okay? So there's definitely this matter. In number 5, this is really, it's sort of like safety, but it's a little bit different because it's about fairness. And this really goes to your point there, Gopal, right? Can I expect whatever results we produce, that we will be treated fairly based on what we brought to the work? Now, a lot of companies really try to do this, okay? They really try to meet this prerequisite, and you see this when leaders give credit to entire teams and they recognize, not reward, but recognize standout contribution. But it's so easy to, kind of break this condition, and then people won't collaborate anymore. Again, a life example, not a work example. 3 years ago, when my son was in 9th grade, in chemistry class, teacher had an assignment for them. They have 3 weeks for it. They need to pair up. So he went with a friend of his, and a week later, my son comes to me and says, so I'm supposed to be working with Leander, but he's not doing anything. And I said, what, anything? Anything. He's not doing anything. And I reach out to him and I talk to him, and like nothing happens. And so, my son had 2 more weeks to kind of live with this. And he did what he should have done, which is to, just put in the work because he wants a good grade. And he did. He got a 95 and he was really happy until he realized that his buddy also got a 95, and then he was pissed. And those two did not work together again at all. I mean, they're still kind of friendly, as much as teenagers would be, but they're not working together at all, right? Because that was a sour experience. That was an unfair experience, and unfairness, it hits us really, really deeply. So Gopal, with that in mind, would you like to comment on your situation?
I think when I meant being unfair, I don't want us to be hung up on this. It's more like, okay, we are trying to build a pie. This is the analogy I use. So there are all these different pieces of the pie, and we want the entire pie. And this person was saying this other piece is not, a full piece there to complete the pie, and he had to carry that load as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, if it happens, once or twice, that might be okay. But if it's consistent, then that becomes a real issue, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's why I was thinking it's more the number 3 rather than the number 5.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, moving on. We, again, are not resources. We do not produce on command. We actually also need to enjoy the experience. So we might have all the previous prerequisites met, right? We want to join forces. We want to collaborate. We believe that the other person will make meaningful contribution. We're safe. It's fair. And yet the experience is, I don't really want to work with this person. Again, companies try to deal with this one by hiring for fit, right? And by making the work environment fun and comfortable. Pandemic era notwithstanding, but you know what I mean. Again, I can share a previous an example from my history. So, you know, like escape rooms, I'm kind of crazy for puzzles, and so I'm a card-carrying member of the National Puzzlers League. There is such a thing, and we have a convention every year, and I go there, and this is like a dream because this is my way to, you know, not just have fun, but also learn a lot from experts, right? Like we go to conferences. And so one time, it was actually midnight, but never mind. That's when the action happens. They brought out a lot of puzzles and they said, okay, people, you need to pair up because they're meant for pair solving. It's not for individuals. And I said, wow, nice, right? Nobody is doing me a favor of, you know, working with me or just being nice because I'm going to work with somebody who wants this. And it started okay, and I was learning from this, and the guy was clearly better than I was. And half an hour in, I'm thinking, you know, this is boring, and I'm not enjoying this. The guy had the charisma of cardboard, and like basically did not even notice that I was there. And I said, I'm not enjoying this, right? The experience was just sour. And so, like with the example with, you know, my son and his friend, I never pair solved with this guy again, because like, why would I? And the same thing happens at work. So at work, it's not, you know, 200 people at a convention. The team is, you know, 4, 6, 8, 10 people, but people will avoid each other. Okay, so there's that. We also need them to co-create the experience. Okay, so there needs to be some interpersonal flexibility and some interest in making the collaboration activity kind of shared rather than doing it on one person's terms. Okay, so I want to give you an example. The 5 BAs I showed you before, who were mobbing on basically some data analysis task, that was totally their own creation. I was the coach, but I didn't tell them anything. I didn't say, hey, you know, folks, there's this thing called mobbing. You should try it. Or, you know, if you intend to mob, look it up. Or I can give you some advice on how to do this. Not at all. It was totally on their own terms. One person found the room, another person went and fetched the laptop. They chose their seating. It was totally theirs. All I did as a coach would be the obvious part, which is at the end, say, why don't you take 2 guys to reflect on this? And, you know, maybe there's something here for another time. So in order for collaboration to take place, we do need to give people this opportunity. And that goes to this one. There does need to be some emotional intelligence, some empathy, some self-awareness, some ability to handle conflict. So in Agile teams, one way we do this is working agreements. We do this through retrospectives, one-on-ones, and so on. Since I like to walk my talk, every year before I have my big weekend race, my buddy and I, we find a Starbucks and we write working agreements. Well, we don't really write them, we just say them, but we basically anticipate how the thing can go south, how we can end up having meltdowns, what will we do if there's trouble, because this is a stressful experience like nobody's business. So we come into it ready for handling stress. Because, and that really, it is something that we don't do enough with Agile teams, right? We bring Agile to a team and we teach them and we coach them and so on, but we kind of throw them into each other's arms and they're not always ready for this, right? And so they might have a really bad experience and then it's like, there's a lot of remediation. Does this, you know, resonate with somebody who wants to make a comment? Or it looks like it explains what's going on for you? Okay, so we'll move on. And I want to show you the last one. So, you know, Agile is big about co-location, which is, of course, out the window as of March. But it's not really about co-location. Co-location is meant to encourage collaboration. It doesn't. Co-location is really something else. It is the ability of people to communicate with minimal barriers so that the interaction is not difficult. So if you have an open plan office, yes, you can do this, right? Or you can configure it some other way. So for instance, if you look at the picture in the bottom left, okay, so fairly large team, in an office where the table in the middle is huge and totally bolted to the floor, I suggested that they congregate around one side because that reduces distances and because that allows them to really communicate on a closer fashion. Well, you can use telepresence, whatever it is. Even now, when everybody's working from home, we still need the same fundamental thing called rapport, so that when we are in conversation, when we're working together, there's something between us. And that something is called rapport. It is basically some subconscious signaling that, we like it here. In person, it's usually a matter of, visual signals and auditory signals. When we are communicating through cameras, like we're doing now, and Zoom and whatever, it's still necessary. And just to show you how this is important, when your internet connection is really good and your camera is reasonably resolution is decent and your microphone is okay, it kind of feels like we're together, almost like a good phone call with video. But what happens when it's choppy, right? When the internet connection is kind of wonky or the picture kind of flickers and so on, what bugs us is that it doesn't feel normal. And it does that on a subconscious level. So really what we want to enable collaboration is we want the possibility of people experiencing that rapport. Okay. So now let's move on to the matter of the deterrence. Because even if all of those 9 conditions are met, there may still be some environmental cues and pressures that discourage people from collaborating. Now, they might proceed despite them, but that takes deliberate effort. All of these things that we're going to show you are really due to leaders' actions. Sorry, some of them are due to leaders' actions, but all of them are on leaders to address. Now, this list is shorter. It is not sequential. Here's the first one. It's how we describe work. So I'm sure this is not news to many of you, that when we talk about work, we can talk about the inputs, the activities, right? Like coding, testing, content writing, deploying. And we can talk about outputs, which is all the stuff, all the deliverables, essentially, right? Finished stories, found defects, fixed defects, whatever. A deployment finished. But we can also talk about outcomes, right? And Agile is big about outcomes because this is the domain of making a difference, okay? What I find is that a lot of people spend disproportionate amount of time describing work in terms of activities and outputs. And I want to give you 3 examples of when we do that. One is a definition of done. I would say that across the hundreds of teams I've worked with, very few had a definition of done that mentioned any outcome. Instead, it talked about activities, right? So coding took place and code review took place and stuff like that. Or they talked about outputs, such as bugs fixed. And that really does what, the points here on the slide say, right? It encourages people very subtly to focus on those activities and achieving those outputs. And then, of course, if they are also specialized, that kind of invites that. Another one is the matter of tasking. And I talked about this before, back-end, front-end, automation, data work, and so on. So again, if we break work down, and in Agile we do that all the time, but we break it down to, again, activities, especially activities that correspond to our specialties, you will get that effect. There's also things like the daily stand-up, right? I mean, when you think about the daily stand-up, it rarely actually touches on outcomes. It talks a lot about, what people have done. Right? And yes, what's standing in the way, but it's generally what they need to do for activities. So all of these, they generally push us to working more on our own and they deter us from working together. I want to show you the next one. And the next one is all those subtle messages that our process and tools communicate to us. Okay? So again, the 3 questions. What have I done? What will I do? What's in my way? The picture on the bottom left, I'm sure you'll recognize it from a tool that shall remain nameless. And I couldn't even count the times when I've, coached teams and we got to collaboration and whatever, and they told me, but we can't collaborate because in the tool, okay, let's call it Jira, fine. There's only room for one person. So how can we say that we work together? Okay, now clearly there are workarounds to that and so on, but that is the perception they've been working under. Okay, they expect the thing communicates work on your own, so they cannot do that. Just like, this thing on the top right? So, this could be a Kanban board. A lot of you know that, when you do a Kanban board, you should do it for the team's work, not individual work. But a lot of teams still have boards that look like this, right? And it's a bit of a legitimate assumption on their part, okay? So you really want to watch out for, those subtle messages and all those hidden assumptions. Another deterrent is who's really responsible for the work? And like I said before, collaboration is very much about joint ownership. So is it really what's going on in your team? So if you go to a stand-up meeting, for instance, and people discuss the workload, and you hear something like, "Oh no, yeah, I can't take that task. I just have a lot on my plate." Notice the my, or people say, "Yeah, that story, moving ahead. My part's done." When people have parts and plates, right? Again, front and back end, automation engineers, and all of that. That's what you can expect. Okay. The picture here on the left, that's from my street here in Toronto. Always gives me a kick, this one, because you can see that the house on the left has a very pristine lawn. Now, where I live, we always need to move nature aside, like in fall, the leaves fall, and in winter it's snow. But people only get the crew to, when they don't do it on their own, but when they get a crew, the crew only does that particular property. So the residents of the house on the left, they get a crew, and the crew comes every week and makes a lot of noise and pollution with their leaf blowers, and they move the 10 leaves that were on the lawn. And like the day I took this picture, seriously, it took 1 minute for the wind to move a lot of the stuff from the right to the left. And it just doesn't even occur to people, hey, you know what? How about, we paid the crew more and they did both houses? People just don't work that way. Stuff on the right, credits, I don't need to tell you, that's how it works. Okay, here's another one. When there's too much work in progress, people will be tempted to work individually. It just looks like the more efficient and the right thing to do. It makes it harder to justify collaboration, because think about it. If you're doing collaboration in order to, reduce risk and, reduce siloing and this and that, that's an important argument, but it tends to, fall victim to, oh, just get it done. Just get it done, right? Here's another one. And this one is definitely on leaders. Definitely. Leaders will allow some things, leaders will want some things, leaders will tolerate some things, and leaders will, prohibit some things. And so what I'm concerned about is exclusionary behaviors. Cliques are one. So a clique is when you have, some people in the team who just, they hang together, they might work together, but, you don't really get into their group. So I moved here to Canada 21 years ago, and the first place I worked at, we had the clique of 3 people. They were all local, as opposed to everybody else on the team who was an immigrant. And they just hung together. And like you could tell, they're like, there's no working with them. And I see this a lot. And you can imagine that this doesn't help, team-wide collaboration. The next one is, everybody's favorite punching bag, the matter of the headphones. Right? And so clearly less of an issue these days. But when you're in an office and somebody puts on headphones, a lot of leaders won't touch that matter because it feels like they're invading a person's privacy if they're asking them to, not to do that. And people will make really, really good, they'll give really good reasons for this, like, I want to concentrate, or I need my music. And I totally get this. I was like this for years. But notice what that communicates, right? It communicates, don't talk to me. And the third one, again, as an immigrant myself, English is not my first language, I totally get that one, right? So when you have more than one language spoken in the office, that excludes others. There's no way around this, right? But I can also, tell you from my personal angle how precious it is for me when I am in an office and somebody else actually speaks the same weird language I know that maybe 10 million people in the world know. It's home. So I gravitate to this. I can't not. But it's exclusionary. And pretty much everywhere I've been, it was tolerated. So there's that. And here's the last one. So a lot of you know that my work in the last few years really centers on mindset, right? And the choices people make and how, this is really where agility lives, not the practices. And so if you want collaboration, you got to value it. That means that you have, as a leader, you have some mental list of what's most important around here. And you have to be explicit about it and intentional and authentic. Because if you're not, people will default to something else, whatever they hold valuable or what they think is valued. So for instance, unless you tell your developers that collaboration is really important and it might push other things down the list, they will probably default to efficiency, right? They'll assume that they just need to finish stuff fast and, that'll just get it done. This has been the case many places I've been. So leading from a set of values is critical anyway in collaboration. If you really want it, it kind of should be up there. Okay. So if you didn't get the handout when we started, this is the link. It should be in the chat because the handout also has the process that I want to take you through right now. So the process for increasing or establishing collaboration, we've sort of touched on it here and there, but now let me kind of put it together for you. The first step, I'm actually going to flip to that slide. The first step is to really understand why you want collaboration. So I asked at the beginning and we heard a few answers, but it's not just about the goals. It's also the parameters. You may want it for knowledge, you may want it for skills, you may want it for quality or for culture or something else, but then how often do you expect it to happen, right? When do you expect it to happen? And what kinds of work do you expect it to happen? Between which people? Is it optional? Is it mandated? Is it encouraged? What do you want for it? So if we had breakout rooms, you would actually be thinking about this in the breakout room and kind of chatting with your buddies. So instead, I'm going to just ask anybody who would like to share, what would you say your goal and parameters for collaboration are, especially with everything that you've heard so far? Again, unmute yourself and just speak.
So,
hey, Ron.
So I've written 5 books, 4 of them co-authored.
Okay.
And a reason for collaboration is getting it done.
Huh. Okay. All right. So
also the joy of mutual learning.
Okay. So this is your goal for your own collaboration. Would anybody like to share an example from, let's say you're with a team, right? Let's say a typical agile team, whatever. And you're wanting to have them collaborate more. What is your goal?
I'll go for one of those as well, cross-pollination of knowledge.
Okay. And so what would you say for the parameters? Do you have an idea for that?
I'm not sure what you mean by parameters.
So on the slide.
How often, when, what kind of work?
Yeah, yeah.
Definitely the hardest work.
Okay.
And there are areas where there's someone who is a bottleneck or someone who's a specialist, and we've got a bus problem.
Okay. Okay. So reduce the dependency on just one or two people. Okay. Would anybody else like to share? Again, in the context of agile teams.
Something came up for me when listening to Ron. I was thinking, what if you collaborate not for getting it done, but what if you collaborate to see what emerges? Sometimes, you know, not everything is about done.
Fair.
What if you have a bunch of people that, you know, you think that, as you were saying before, for the reasons for the collaboration, that you trust people, that you're interested, that you think that they can contribute, that you have psychological safety with them. What if you all, I know, want something new, and you like get together and you collaborate and you see what emerges?
Fair enough. Okay, so your goal is basically to expand the thinking, the options and so on, right? And the parameters are anything we're doing that could result in something new. Let's work on it together.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you said that also the word think tank come to mind, right?
Okay.
Is there any collaboration in this think tank where people think on the big problems?
Yeah, I don't know
they
about
collaborate?
the tanks. Yeah.
I should have just pop in my mind.
Okay. Anyway, so once you do that, you want to think about specific situations, because really what I'm recommending here is not that you get with your team and you kind of pronounce, right? But instead, you think about specific situations, and that is because of the next few steps. So let me explain step 3.
Hey, yo, quick question.
Yeah, David, yes, go.
Have you ever used pair stare? So to Ron's point about specialization, I like to introduce pair stare, which is kind of a round robin of each team member working with each other throughout the sprint. And basically what it does, it looks like a stare, and you have on one side all the names of the team, and then on the top.
Oh, right, and the diagonal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I find that very useful. Sometimes it's hard for some people, which is natural, but once you get into the cycle and people start to see that it's working, you find who the natural partnerships are and you find the ones that aren't. So I like suggesting that.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful technique. I would want you though to also keep in the back of your mind what happens if it bombs, right? Because you're effectively, I mean, unless you have prepared your team for this, then you're effectively pushing them to each other, and that might run into those prerequisites and kind of
it's a training mechanism. You can't always lead with the horse to water of oil and vinegar together.
Right. No, absolutely.
So, so it's a training mechanism.
I want to Google this later. Can you spell the name of that?
Yeah, pair, P-A-I-R.
Pair.
As
you
can collaborative pairs. And
you can also add it to a chat box.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Awesome. So, and I think this also goes to really, David, to your point here. So look at what I'm suggesting in this step. So think about the situation. The situation you're describing is essentially, there's some story work in the middle of the sprint. Okay. Mentally survey your team and really think, is for each person, are any of the prerequisites unmet? And if so, what's the earliest one? Because remember, they're in a sequence. Okay, so I'm just going to give you an example. Let's say, a totally hypothetical example, let's say that you want developers and testers to collaborate on defect cleanup before a release. Okay, totally legitimate. Okay, now maybe they have good reasons to collaborate. That's number one. And they value each other's contributions. So we're past 2 and 3. But the tester doesn't feel safe around one of those developers. And the developer doesn't feel treated fairly. And a third developer is all for collaboration, but has trouble handling stressful interactions. So in this example, what you would see is that for everybody, it's a different condition that is really keeping them away from collaborating. So once you do this analysis, look for basically, is it similar across the team or is it not? And I want to give you examples for both cases. If you are seeing consistency, then you have a systemic issue that you need to address. So for instance, there was a company that asked me to come in and help them in terms of their product evolution. So there was some training on stories and iterative and incremental and outcomes and this and that and whatever. And I could tell from their questions, and I actually verified this by asking them, They did not collaborate at all. Work there was broken down totally by specialty. They had really good people. They expected to work alone. Nobody had a good reason to collaborate, so they were effectively just handing work across. So when you see a situation like this, you need to address it, at a system level. It has to do with really how you have a team. Here's another example where it was the second prerequisite that was unmet. So again, if you have the handout in front of you, you'll see that there was motivation to join forces, but it stopped short of collaboration. That came from a media company. I was working with the team that was choosing and developing shows. So like I do some I do some work with non-software teams as well. And the producers there, awesome people. I loved working with them. But producer is very much a solo job, at least in that particular neck of the woods. And so, yeah, they loved helping out, but only as backup. So there was never a case of, we are doing this show together. Even if it's not 50-50, even if it's 70-30, that was just not there. Whenever there was any interest in working together, it's because somebody needed a backup. Maybe they're on vacation or something like that. So the conversations I had with them were not personal. They were with everybody on, how do we want to approach this? Because we're ultimately all responsible for all the shows. Another one, a pension fund that I've worked with a lot here in Toronto, where there was a lot of collaboration in IT, a lot of collaboration in the business, not across the lines. So they did generally agree that it was a good thing and they did it, but the business people just didn't think that the IT people would make any meaningful contribution to, modeling or to, any type of business decisions. They said, nah, they don't know. They don't know us, even if it's people who've been there 10 years and worked with them the whole time. So again, this is a systemic thing. It's not that you talk to one person and you say, well, can you try harder? It's just not about that. And you might also be seeing an inconsistency. And then you do solve it on a personal matter. So at that media company, I was also working with the digital products group, a couple hundred people, beautiful engineering culture, lovely stuff. One team was doing the front end of the whole product. Basically, it's a feed type of thing, like, you kind of scroll through, like on, I don't know, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. Hardcore engineering, awesome developers. For all of them, all the prerequisites were met. They did collaborate, all except the architect. The architect stopped short at number one, basically, and she told me, I don't think they can do my work, and I don't want them working with me. That was it. So this had to be solved on a personal level.
Yes. Back to number 3, I noticed that you say mentally survey your team.
Yeah, you don't ask them.
You don't ask them. I mean, but can you really? How do you perceive if two people, don't have psychological safety unless you've sort of witnessed a problem?
Yeah.
Yeah,
you do basically observations. Yeah, observations and the conversations and this and that. But you don't go to anybody and asking, how safe do you feel, right? We don't do that, right? We might do safety scales and retrospectives and this and that, fine. But usually, if you're being a leader to that team and this is what you're looking at, you would usually have enough evidence to get a sense of what's going on. Yeah. So anyway, once you've done this, right, and you've worked on the matter of, the necessary conditions being met, now you want to look at the deterrence. You want to see whether you or others are doing something that deters them, right? And again, if you look at the deterrent list, right, there's a bunch of stuff there, right? Where is it? Here. Maybe the team is just overloaded. Okay, maybe that's what you're doing. Maybe somebody else is doing. Who knows? But that can explain why people are just, forking off to work on their own thing. Or maybe there are exclusionary behaviors. This is something that a lot of people don't notice until it's pointed out to them. What process you use, what tools you use, and do they imply people just do your thing? So that's that, basically, because at the end, yeah, this takes a while. So hence step number 7, which is, pick your battles, prioritize your efforts, and just be patient, because it's not easy, and it does take time to help a team be more collaborative. And you really want to do this right, and kind of make it a cultural thing, right? That has to do with the valuing, so that even if you have turnover, it persists. Actually, I want to say something about that. So that media company with the digital products team, when I first came in, turnover was kind of normal for the industry. One of the first things I helped them do was establish their values. One of them ended up being collaboration. They really, really invested in it. It was beautiful to see how management all the way up really became servant leaders. It took a while, but even with turnover, it became a thing, and it stayed a thing. It's just how they roll. So if you look at them now, you might see, I don't know, 80% of the original people, 60%, I don't even know anymore. A lot of people are new, and still, collaboration is just how they roll. So that is what I had for you. So like I mentioned, I will be raffling a copy of the book. But before I do that, I do want to take questions. And I'm going to stop the share so I actually see everybody. Would anybody like to ask a question or make a comment?
I have a question that I think might be really, really dumb. So we'll see.
It's a safe space.
Those are sometimes the best. Yeah, that's okay. What are the hallmarks that you pick up when you encounter a team that really is collaborating? How do you know?
I'm not seeing territoriality. I'm seeing, I'm going to say fluidity. How's that for a word? So it's about, we shift work to whoever can handle it, because we need to, we want to, and so on. If you look at their stand-ups, and let me tell you, as somebody who usually comes into environment because their agile is not working out, I'm usually bored out of my wits at stand-ups. In a collaborative team, I don't usually say that. It honestly looks like a bunch of friends deciding, like, where do we go out today? Okay, I mean, clearly they talk about work, but it's the same dynamic of, like, this is ours, right? Just clearly you can see this in planning and how they, farm out tasks and decide what to do and so on. So those are usually the things. Yeah. Would anybody else have a question?
I just have a comment. Oh, am I off?
That works too.
Okay. So back when you were talking about just collaboration, and you were talking about, the activities, outputs, and outcomes, and outcome as value is the way I recall you described it. The thing is, I almost never saw, unless I was able to make it happen, when I was managing a team at HP, mostly they never saw the real outcome, which was the result of the use of what they delivered. Not what they delivered, but the use of it was valuable. And so I usually, after we did a follow-up with the internal folks, because that's who we worked for, I usually talk to the manager of that department or division that we delivered to and ask them how they felt about it, how it was going. And I said, the team would really like to know this. How about we come and see it in working? And so I always, after something like that, where we delivered internally, there was always, the team would come over and see it in use. Whatever, they had delivered, how were people using it, asking them, was it better than the last version.
Sure.
So they had an actual discussion with the people who were using it, and that they always came back just feeling so high, because they could really feel it. And that actually helped cement their ability to collaborate because they saw what would happen as a group. Yeah.
Right. So we definitely want that. One benefit, presumed benefit of having a PO work closely with the team is that we can have that conversation earlier, right? Sometimes a team will not have immediate sight of the outcome, but they can talk about it.
Right.
Right? I mean, look, sometimes all you need to do is remind people to simply ask, what are we getting at here? What problem are we solving? So it's not just about, put this dialog box up, connect the validation, this and that, right? It's all tasks, right? But why are we doing this? Who is going to care? What difference will it make? Just have that type of thinking. If you can actually have them, sit with the user and see the difference they're making, beautiful. But sometimes that will happen, months down.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a basic thing, right? We all know, especially developers, right? You tell them how their work matters, that they bright up. Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. So who's going to be getting a book today? Let's see. Who?
Any other questions or comments from our lovely audience?
Yeah. Okay.
Andrew, you're smiling. What's coming up for you, Andrew Webster?
Well, something that just struck me, you mentioned, Gil, language. Of course, that can be very exclusive.
Yes.
But I've also been thinking, as I was listening to you, about Erin Meyer's work in The Culture Map, where she points out that there are many sort of dimensions of social interaction where national or regional cultures come at things very differently. And I'm wondering if you found that what you've laid out for us tonight works well across cultures, or if you found that you've had to sort of adjust in context.
It's really hard for me to answer this one. Look, I do a lot of my work in Canada and the US. And when it's the US, it's usually, your area or the Valley and Boston. Here, it's primarily Toronto and Montreal, not so much Montreal, but Toronto and Vancouver. Almost every team I deal with is a mix. So I rarely have experiences where there is a monoculture that is different from mine. So I can't even answer this. Okay. The one time I was exposed to a monoculture is in the country I came from, which is Israel, if anybody's wondering. And we have a pretty distinct culture, which I wasn't always integrating well with, even though I grew up there. And, I would talk to Israelis differently than I would talk to Canadians. Right? The sort of things that they resonate with is just different. But does it mean that, when it comes to collaboration, I would do anything different? Probably not.
It would be a good bit of global homework to set everybody, wouldn't it?
When I wrote my Human Side of Agile, somebody from India actually threw this challenge to me, and he said, maybe you can also write about what it's like when, teams are from other countries. And I said, you know what, I would love to, but I have no clue about that. and to be honest, I still don't.
Yes, you'd need a convenient client that was willing to ship you around the planet when such things become possible again.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
What's it like to work in a kibbutz doing agile?
So that I do not know, and usually the kibbutzim don't actually do software development. So yeah. Anywho,
so I have some sympathy with you, Gil. My wife is Israeli, and I'm familiar with that Israeli culture, and there are differences. Yes.
Yeah.
Can I add on to the previous question? Some of those companies, Gil, that you worked with, I'm guessing, will have outsourced or they'll have a team in the Philippines, in India,
Yeah.
China, and what's and so to expand the question a little bit, what's it been like getting collaboration across geographies and across time zones for that matter?
You know what? So clearly the time zones don't help. Okay, they don't. But what I find is that it's very much a case of, at the individual level, again, those prerequisites, and at the when it comes to the deterrence, is very much a system thing. So I'll give you an example. I recently did a strategic assessment on a big program at one of the local banks, and actually 2 programs. One program had 3 teams here and 1 team in India. But the team in India was totally self-sufficient from an agile standpoint. Okay, so they all rolled up to the same program, but the team in India did not really rely on anybody here, right? They had their PO, Scrum Master, and so on. Another program didn't. They had people in India, not a team. They had no support whatsoever. No leader of any kind, no Scrum Master, no PO, no BA, nobody, just devs and testers. The difference between their experiences was striking. The first one, with the whole team in India, that team rocked it, right? They were really good. Every now and then they had to collaborate with people here because of, being part of the same program, but they made it work and it was all fine and whatever. Whereas what happened with the other program, no. People here essentially carved off pieces that the people in India would do. And those folks had no choice in the matter. They just showed up to work and they just did stuff. They were friendly and helpful to each other. Even then, apparently they were in 2 locations in India. And it was obvious that their experience sucked. Seriously, it was just horrible. And that was very much a case of we have an us and them. And since the whole thing is run by the Canadian bank, then, if we're here, we decide. So fortunately, they are learning from this and they're trying to replicate the first experience. So it's not, so they don't do more of the second again. But yeah, it was very much a case of, just resources.
Sometimes in those cases, you need to write it in a contract how you work. I've come across that in some organizations before. India's notably on that side, they still have a kind of leadership issue, right? Meaning that they're part of, I hate to say a factory in some places, but they
with the agencies,
but basically they follow a leadership type role, and I've been on some of those calls where in some cases they don't allow the team to talk to you, so it's a little frustrating.
I know, and what I found extra frustrating is that these were really good people, right? And I saw some of their code. It's part of what I do in assessments. I also look at the code, and it was really good, and you could tell that, given the opportunity, they would love to work with each other, but that was just not in the cards.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I was scrolling wildly through the list of people who opted in to kind of randomize.
One sec, Gil, I'm going to interrupt you. While Gil is thinking about how is he going to raffle the book, I would like to invite everyone to our chat window and give us a quick feedback, because we are here to serve you, and if we can serve you better, we would love to learn how. So what I ask you to do right now, go to a chat window and just quickly answer 3 questions. How would you rate our meetup 1 to 5? Would you recommend it to your friend? And if any comments, what we can do better, just type what we can do better. And I'll take a minute for that or 2. And while you're doing it, and we're very, very grateful that you're giving us a feedback, I'll turn it back to Gil.
All right. So,
hey, Gil, this is Farrell. Can I just ask you a quick question? It's kind of a follow.
Yeah.
I was wondering about, with COVID, how do you see that affecting collaboration? Is your process the same, or are you emphasizing some of the components that you explained to us tonight?
It's the
Emphasizing some
same.
over others?
It is totally the same. What I am seeing is that you just need to work harder at it. And some of the deterrents actually become worse, right? Because, for the longest time, people felt pressure to perform or they would lose their jobs, things like that. So again, they hunker down. You want to allow people flexibility to work, when they can, like, without kids around and whatever. But that also did away with some collaboration because it wasn't emphasized enough. What I also see is that the environment is just not conducive to that because the tools are pathetic. Like, I still work with people who don't have cameras. I mean, seriously. There's that, or they use Teams because they're not supposed to use Zoom, but they don't know how to use Teams. All of that nonsense, right? So that's definitely not helping. Yeah. All right.
Right.